Welcome everyone to our event on innovation for inclusive, equitable, and quality education for women and girls in Africa. This session is part of the Skoll World Forum's Ecosystem Day and is wholly curated and hosted by NalaFEM Collective. My name is Rahel W. Sebhatu. I am the research director for Afresist, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. We're happy to have you with us today for an hour-long discussion on innovative ideas and approaches for inclusive, equitable, and quality education for African women and girls. This discussion will highlight the role of innovation in empowering women and girls through education and skills development, as well as highlighting innovative ideas and projects in alignment with our Africa Young Women Beijing Plus 25 Manifesto, in particular Demand 7, and in advancing and in achieving the SDG4 goal, the fourth goal on quality education. As a reminder, this event is being recorded. If you have any issues regarding this, please write to us in the chat. We will have a panel discussion and then open the floor for discussion and questions. You can use the chat box to ask questions, and our panelists will be happy to carry the conversation with you. We would like to thank the Skoll Foundation and Skoll World Forum for this opportunity to host our event at the Ecosystem Day of the 2022 edition of the forum. We are also grateful for our panelists who will share their expertise with us today. We have with us Ms. Yasmine Ouirhrane, the NalaFEM Collective Council member and co-founder of We Belong, Ms. Caroline Ngonze, Senior Manager of the Education Plus Initiative at UNAIDS, Ms. Natasha Harris-Harb, Lead of Youth Movements and Feminist Leadership at the UN Girls Education Initiative, and we have Ms. Wadi Ben Hirki, Education Advocate from Nigeria and founder of Wadi Ben Hirki Foundation. We encourage you all to sign the Africa Young Women Beijing Plus 25 Manifesto, which we will share into the link right now. You can also join our newsletter for, in order to get updates on upcoming events and opportunities. We'll also share in the chat a link about that. So before we get into our opening remarks by Ms. Yasmine, we will now project a video of our council members so that you may have a better understanding of what we at the NalaFEM Collective advocate for.
Assalamu alaikum and hello. I'm Yasmine Abdelmajid.
I am Zozibini Toons.
I am Filson Abdullahi.
I am Hajar Sharif.
I am Oluwaseun Ayodeji Oshowomi.
It's Rosebel Kagumiri.
My name is Garendo.
I am Vanessa Nakate.
I am Aisata Kamara.
I am Rose Washuka Masharia.
Je suis Yasmine Ouirhrane.
My name is Intifad Mahmoud.
My name is Emma Feminist.
وأنا اسمي آية الشابي.
I am a council member of Nala Feminist Collective.
I have signed
and endorsed
the Africa Young Women
Beijing Plus 25 Manifesto,
a groundbreaking feminist document with 10 bold demands.
Because during this COVID-19 pandemic, and as we build for a post-pandemic world, we cannot forget the women who have driven Africa's economy.
This is because no matter where you live on the African continent, access to justice continues to be elusive to young women and people of gender diverse identities on our continent.
Because I say enough is enough to sexual abuse and its chronic effects and trauma.
Because I believe that the cycle of female genital mutilation can be broken.
Because thousands of women are minutes away from femicide, rape, trafficking, and abuse with no safety and no shelter.
Because we need an education that can free us from oppression and the damaging effects of unconscious bias.
Because I want to silence the guns which have ravaged the lives of many young women of my generation.
It is the responsibility of the international community to tackle the root causes of this conflict.
It is high time we provide protection from cyber harassment, threats, and sexist language.
I belong to a bold generation of African women who deserve a life with dignity.
We must empower young women and girls from vulnerable and marginalized communities,
young women with disabilities, young women seeking asylum, and young women migrants.
Especially in times of armed conflict, natural disasters, and displacement.
Understand the impact of daily sexism, misogyny, and discrimination, resulting in severe challenges affecting young women.
Especially the impact of climate change that could have been prevented across generations.
We must keep each other accountable.
Because we should not be silenced, we should face this with courage.
Because we need to act now.
So, let us demand for
ending gender discrimination,
for inclusive, equitable, and quality education,
for economic justice,
for silencing the guns,
on digital justice,
to on mental health and well-being,
access to justice and protection,
to the criminalizing of the epidemic of gender-based violence,
for intergenerational co-leadership,
and for sexual reproductive health and rights.
The Manifesto will ensure that these demands are heard in the spaces where change can happen.
The Africa I want,
l'Afrique que je veux,
is just,
is very inclusive,
where women and girls live free of violence,
and where opportunities and benefits are fairly distributed. And you?
Sign the Manifesto today.
It matters.
Your voice matters.
Generation equality
cannot
afford
to move forward
without Africa.
Et Génération Égalité ne peut pas
avancer sans l'Afrique.
Thank you very much for that. You can find the manifesto in multiple languages on the NalaFEM website, www.nalafem.org. The manifesto is there, as well as other information on how young people on the African continent, in the diaspora, can participate in bringing about the gender equality that we seek to. So yes, let's continue with our panel discussion. First of all, I'm pleased to invite Ms. Yasmine Ouirhrane to provide her opening remarks for our session today. Yasmine is a NALA Council member and co-founder of We Belong, a platform and podcast that amplifies the voice of the new daughters of Europe. She also served as an appointed expert for the European Union and the African Union, and she delivered dozens of recommendations to international institutions, including the World Bank, Foreign Affairs Canada, and Wilton Park, UK Foreign Office. She provided workshops on access to education, equal opportunities, and social entrepreneurship for Tony Blair Institute, Change.org, EM Business School, and WISE Qatar, among others. She was recognized as Young European of the Year 2019 by the Schwarzkopf Foundation, EDD Young Leader by the European Commission, Women Deliver Young Leader, and she is a member of the Gender Innovation Agora at UN Women. Ms. Ouirhrane, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today, and welcome everyone to this session. So today I will start by speaking on behalf of the NALA Feminist Collective, a great privilege and honor. And it is an honor for us to host this session as a NALA Feminist Collective at this Skoll World Forum 2022. As it was mentioned before, today we will discuss inclusive, equitable, and quality education for women and girls in Africa. And this forum is under the theme of Face Forward, and it aims at discussing learning from the past, but also moving collectively in the direction of progress. So as we reflect on this, it is crucial to have this discussion on specifically on young women in Africa, to move forward with the empowerment of women and girls in the continent, but also in the African diaspora, and this through educational skill and development, but also to highlight the innovative ideas and projects existing out there, and able to provide the best practices and recommendations that we will hear today from our panelists, and that are crucial in the development of skills for curricula and new approaches. So as a feminist collective, we made it clear since the start and since the launch actually of our manifesto, that education must be a right rather than a privilege. Our African young women, Beijing 25 manifesto, it states it called for a guaranteeing of universal and equal access to education in order to effectively address imbalance between young men and women in certain professions, but also to increasing the national budgets allocation for education to accelerate the development, for example, of e-learning, and delivering an inclusive, equitable, but also free access to this education in primary, pre-primary, secondary, and tertiary education, especially for girls in offline remote areas. The manifesto demand was signed by over 10,000 feminists, and also it requires the removal of barriers that exist to young women and girls' education, including poverty, but also school fees, transport, safety in access to school, but also early and forced marriage, sanitation and menstrual hygiene facilities, gender biases, early and forced marriage, as I say, but also early and underintended pregnancy, and of course, the bias and stereotypes in curricula that also lead to maybe bullying, violence in schools, and ultimately damage women's access to education. So we want to remind stakeholders that empowering women must also include young women in Africa, and especially from vulnerable and marginalized communities, conflicts and humanitarian settings, and giving them equal chances to join universities through scholarships and dedicated and targeted scholarships, and especially in the area of STEMs, where women are very few. So thanks again for having us at this Skoll World Forum and for hosting this conversation and giving us the opportunity to address and share our recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you for those opening remarks, Yasmine. I would like to ask you two questions. In your opinion, what are the best practices to advance women's and girls' rights through education and skills development? And can you also tell us a bit about innovative ideas and projects happening within the African diaspora in regards to education?
Should I start? Okay. So for when it comes to approaches, and so can you repeat just say the first question, please? Just because.
Yeah, the first question, what are the best practices to advancing women and girls' education, or the right to education?
Okay, all right. So I can only speak as an African woman from diaspora, right? So I will only have this focus as all my work is around this. And for me, it's very important to mention that as a brown and black women in Africa, in Europe, sorry, or in, outside of the continent, it is difficult often to access quality education because not only of our ethnic background, but also because of socioeconomic barriers that we might face being immigrant descents or immigrant ourselves. So this is a very important point. How do we make sure that we remove those barriers? And some of the struggles that women face often is not having access to the right opportunities or scholarships, and even when they are there is the lack of information. So the best practice is, first of all, it is for us as a co-founder of We Belong, we want to make sure that at any sphere of power where decision making can focus also on those issues, that we address them at that level, so that when the European Commission, for example, or when the European Parliament issues a new program, whether it is a scholarship, whether it is an Erasmus training program, or whether it is an internship, we need to make sure that there is a quota allocated to young women from diaspora. And this is a point that institutions are starting to be very conscious about, the need for more diversity in every level. When it comes to accessing education, as minorities in the diaspora, so living outside of Africa, it is sometimes also difficult to feel at peace between different identities. And so it is important to celebrate our different cultures instead of perpetually being stigmatized because of our diversity. And especially when we think about the curriculum, we don't even study the history of our parents or our ancestors in a proper way. And this has to do also with post-colonial studies. But even just accessing education, to keep it short, it is still a privilege for some people, for some young women, and especially when the layer of social inequality comes at play. And then the second point, how do we innovate? Well, I can speak on behalf of We Belong. What we're trying to do is we're trying to promote through our podcast and platform new role models of women with immigrant backgrounds living across Europe, because we want to show that my co-founder, for example, she's a Black woman. She is originally half Togolese and half from Luxembourg. Growing up, she never saw a woman in politics, so she never dreamt that she could become one day a politician. And then at 21 years old, she actually got elected. And for the generation to come, having a woman like her being the first, but also like the only, unfortunately, she just want to make sure that she's not the last. So that's our approach that We Belong, opening new opportunities for diaspora women to make sure that they can dream big because they see other women, they made it, but especially because they're encouraged to do so. Because unfortunately, sometimes when you don't have a role model or somebody telling you that you can do it, it's also difficult to find yourself the courage to break those barriers. So yeah, this is my few points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yasmine. Next, we will have Ms. Caroline Ngonze, Senior Manager of the Education Plus Initiative at UNAIDS. Caroline leads the Education Plus Initiative, which is co-led by the executive directors of 5 UN agencies, namely UNAIDS, UNESCO, UNFPA, UNICEF, and UN Women, working with governments, networks of adolescent girls and young women, civil society organizations, youth networks, academia, and the private sector, traditional and faith-based leadership. The initiative is centered on the empowerment of adolescent girls and young women in the achievement of gender equality in sub-Saharan Africa, with secondary education as a strategic entry point. The initiative leverages secondary schools as access points to deliver a comprehensive package of health and other services, including comprehensive sexuality education, access to sexual and reproductive health services, prevention and response to gender-based and sexual violence, and ensuring successful school-to-work transitions for economic empowerment. Earlier, Caroline was the officer in charge at the UNFPA Representation Office in the African Union, the AU, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA, and has previously worked in Chad, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, and Belgium with diverse stakeholders spanning Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific regions. The floor is yours, Ms. Caroline.
Thank you very much, Rahel, for that. And I'm really glad to be part of this very exciting conversation. It excites me when we are talking about education, innovation, and I'm really glad that you're able to really be here today to exchange experiences and practices to see what is working. Now, in terms of innovation, we like to think of innovation in education, not necessarily meaning all the crypto, the Bitcoin, that kind of innovation, but also looking at innovation in education as a means of solving a real problem in a new and simple way to promote equitable learning. And for us, that means getting all the children in school and making sure that they're accessing quality learning, which means that needs very strong, innovative education systems. And this is particularly critical right now, because we do know that even before the COVID-19 pandemic, we had 34 million adolescent girls and young women out of school in sub-Saharan Africa. As we open up and go and deal with the pandemic, we know that there are projections that are telling us that almost 20 million adolescent girls and young women, many of them in sub-Saharan Africa, will not be going back to school. And so that is drastic. Those numbers are alarming. And for us, innovation means now getting all these adolescent girls and young women back into school. And this means an ecosystem alignment that has been talked about here, meaning the alignment is across their families, the educators, the decision makers, to ensure that there is enough and adequate data collection. There is regular monitoring to help people make decisions, to find out what is working, who is benefiting, and most importantly, who is being left behind. Because we do know there are those who are being left behind, those from the poorest households, those from the rural areas, those marginalized as well. We also have key populations who are not able to access education, who are being left behind. So for us, innovation in education is seen within that lens, bringing new solutions to a problem in a simple way, encompassing that. And for us at the Education Plus initiative, this is a gender transformative rights-based agenda to ensure that women and girls are empowered using secondary education as the strategic entry point, meaning when they get to secondary school, they have access to a range of health and social protection services, meaning if they need to have sexual and reproductive health services, they are connected to a health center, or these services are available within the school setting in a youth-friendly manner. When they need to have information about comprehensive sexuality education, how do they protect themselves? This information is available and is delivered without bias, without stigma within the school setting. It's also ensuring that adolescent girls and young women within the school setting are free from gender-based and sexual violence. So ensuring there is ways to prevent and to respond to gender-based and sexual violence, and also ensuring that they have smooth transitions from school to work, entrepreneurship for economic empowerment. And so when we're looking at that within that lens, the innovation comes in by the fact that this is a range of responses coming together using a single entry point for those who are in secondary education, but also making sure that those who are out of school are also not left behind, that there are systems and mechanisms to make sure that they're also brought within the fold. So the innovation here means it is not a standalone initiative that says education. It is covering all the other needs that a successful transition to adulthood requires. And in terms of that, just in winding up, so I don't take too much time, we are looking at it also from two angles: the practical needs of the adolescent girls and young women within the education system. For example, if you're talking about issues of access to comprehensive sexuality education, whether that is within the school setting, whether it is digitally available because there are platforms that provide this. Are you using gamification to provide this information? Are you using SMS to provide this information? So using novel ways that are youth-friendly to access the information. If it is issues of gender-based violence and sexual violence, are we having the hotspots being mapped? Do we have young people themselves reporting and speaking up and talking about this? So there is a very innovative program called You Report by UNICEF, one of the partners, that actually puts this power within the hands of the young people themselves, who are able to come up, report, speak out for their rights in terms of what they need to transition. Looking at school to work transitions as well from a practical need. If you're looking at innovation in entrepreneurship, how is that being provided? How are we teaching them? How are we catalyzing, ensuring that there's transformative knowledge and information needed for this entrepreneurship to come through, whether it's preparing them for the jobs of the future, the green jobs that we are having, whether it's supporting solar technology for schools to help with that. And then looking at these practical needs, while also juxtaposing that with their strategic interests, meaning mid-term to long-term. What are the policy changes that are needed? What is the legislation that needs to come into place to ensure that this actually is delivered? Is secondary education mandatory? Is it cost-free? As informed earlier, it might be mandatory, but then there's costs for school uniform, for transport, for all these other non-fee-paying costs in school that are also preventing the adolescent girls and young women from getting into school. So also looking at policy and legislative frameworks for whether it's second chance education, where we have teenage mothers who are also able to access learning to actually change the trajectory of their lives. Are we having digital policies and financial literacy policies for the learners to equip them for the jobs and the entrepreneurship space that they will go into? Are we having marketable skills being passed on to these young people within the school setting? Do we have parental consent laws that actually enhance access to services? Because we do have laws that prevent an adolescent girl from going to a health service to access sexual and reproductive health services. So in brief, looking at it from that kind of point of view, making it a holistic response that is multi-sectoral, going beyond education, but then using an innovative new way to solve an issue that is still persistent within the continent. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. We've all heard it, you know, it's about the innovative way of doing this is to have a range of responses that cater to young women and girls through a single entry point so that they can get a holistic, comprehensive education and services. Very nice. And I imagine that it's also a much better approach when it comes to the limited resources there seems to be when it comes to, you know, putting women and girls' needs first. Next, we have Ms. Natasha Harris-Harb, lead of youth movements and feminist leadership at the UN Girls Education Initiative. Natasha is a feminist activist, campaigner, and organizer. She is the lead of this youth movements and feminist leadership for UNGEI, what's called the United Nations Girls Education Initiative. She works to shift the power dynamics of young feminists to be partners in all processes in achieving gender equality in and through education. Natasha has previously worked with organizations such as Plan International Canada, and CODE. She works to grow a global sisterhood of solidarity. She's a co-founder of Cat Calls of Ottawa. I hope I got that right. And a co-lead of Chalk Back, a young feminist-led nonprofit working to end gender-based street harassment through art and community. Natasha is currently pursuing her master's in nonprofit leadership and philanthropy at Carleton University. So, Natasha, I have two questions for you. The first one, as a feminist activist, how do you envision the relation between innovation in education and advancement of women and girls' rights? And can you also tell us about the innovative projects that UNGEI is leading in terms of this innovation towards the field of girls' education?
Sure. Thank you so much, Rahel, and also to NalaFEM for holding this important space and inviting UNGEI. And it's such an honor to be in a discussion with feminists and innovators such as Caroline, Yasmine, and Wadi. So thank you for that. First, I'd like to acknowledge the land that I'm currently on, which is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, colonially known as Ottawa within Canada. Also, I'd really like to invite global North-based practitioners and international organizations to reflect during this session on how can we shift our power and actively be anti-racist and decolonize our work to progress girls' education, especially within Africa. So today I'll be focusing my intervention on UNGEI's innovative intergenerational approach to working that cuts across all our areas to progress gender equality in and through education. Whether that be through campaigning, policy advocacy, research, programming, we're ensuring that we're actively partnering with young feminists, especially girls and young women, in a meaningful and sustainable way. I'll draw on 2 examples. Firstly, UNGEI, in partnership with IIEP UNESCO, coordinates the Gender at the Center Initiative, GCI. It was established by the G7 Ministers of Education and Development in collaboration with multilateral organizations, civil society, young feminists, and has grown into a strong feminist movement. Rooted in gender-responsive education sector planning, the initiative champions the leadership of ministers of education and other national actors to develop and implement plans, policies, and interventions for the purpose of advancing gender equality in education, and especially girls' education. Gender-responsive education planning, also known as GRESP, is really focused on embedding gender equality into the DNA of all aspects of education, from the way education data are collected and analyzed to what policies are created, how schools and education institutions are managed. The initiative is led by the GCI Alliance in 8 countries in sub-Saharan Africa: Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, Mozambique, Niger, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. We've been really intentional ensuring that girl and young women and feminist-led groups are active partners within GRESP and within GCI. The very first GRESP workshop that young feminists actively participated in was in 2019 in Abuja, Nigeria, in which Wadi was one of the participants. They attended the workshop and were active partners following this, including the co-design, implementation, and advisement on the projects, and attended the board meeting last week of GCI. To quote Alima, the permanent secretary of Ouirhrane, who participated in a GRESP workshop held in Senegal in 2021, when it was asked, why should girl, young women, and young feminists participate in GCI? She said, as the saying goes, you can't shave a person's head in their absence. You can't treat a person's problems without the person being there. Young people, especially young women and girls, are much more legitimate to represent themselves than their spokespersons. We must be in the decision-making bodies so that politicians can take care of our needs. Now that is innovation. The second example I'd love to share is Transform Education. Transform Education is a coalition of young feminist networks working to transform education for gender equality. It was launched in 2019, and it takes a feminist, intergenerational, and intersectional approach to its work and positions young feminist activists and organizations as essential partners in transforming education systems for gender equality. It's the first coalition of its kind in the global education sector, and TE has a really strong movement within Africa. To name a few of the amazing young feminist networks working within Africa, Wona Collective in Malawi uses poetry as a form of advocacy for girls' education. Rise Up Movement focuses on climate justice in Uganda. The Wadi Hirki Foundation we'll hear more about in Nigeria. Also in Nigeria, the Teenage Network, who created gender-based violence hotlines to report GBV in schools. So those are just a few, but young African feminists are innovating, and as global organizations, we must partner with them sustainably and provide them with ample resources and space. Lastly, along with NalaFEM, UNGEI, and Generation Unlimited, we're co-developing a learning brief on intergenerational partnership. This brief highlights anchoring principles. I'd like to focus on one, and that is resources. Resources must underpin fully fledged co-leadership. Donors must be prioritizing funding to young feminist-led African networks actively doing the work. Meaningful intergenerational partnership is a part of UNGEI's long-term vision and mission. Meaningful feminist intergenerational partnership will be crucial to achieving inclusive, equitable, safe, and quality education for women and girls in Africa and globally. We're very excited to continue to collaborate with those in this panel and in the Zoom room to make this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natasha, for your intervention and for letting us know so much of what UNGEI is doing in terms of innovative ways of, girls' education. Also a lot of networking on a global level, which is something that we like, feminism without borders. Next, we will have Ms. Wadi Ben Hirki, education advocate from Nigeria and founder of Wadi Ben Hirki Foundation. Wadi is a development practitioner, public speaker, and writer. She is the founder and executive director of Wadi Ben Hirki Foundation. She is presently pursuing a master's degree in international education and development at the prestigious University of Sussex, United Kingdom, as a Chevening scholar. Wadi is the 2021 Mandela Washington Fellow, an Ashoka Changemaker Exchange alumna, and served as a One Campaign champion for 2 years. She was the face of the Canadian High Commission's #SheCanLead campaign in Nigeria in 2017. Wadi is a member of the African Leadership Institute Youth Advisory Board from 2018 to 2021 and serves as a Chatham House Common Futures Conversations country representative. She was also the New Partnership for African Development NEPAD delegate for the Girls 20 Summit in 2020. And she was featured in the Women of Wonder documentary for Expo Dubai 2020's Women's Pavilion in collaboration with Kotler and Yours in Power documentary by One Campaign. Wadi, can you please tell us, as a youth advocate, how do you perceive the role of education and skills development for young women and girls in Africa? And what would be the best practices to adopt moving forward? And also, can you tell us about innovative ideas and projects that are taking place in Nigeria to tackle education access for women and girls there?
Okay, thank you very much for having me. So I would say that my advocacy journey has been quite a while. 7 years ago, I was 18 then, and sometimes I look back and I'm like, why did I do it? I guess it was out of frustration, seeing that I'm from northern Nigeria, and I'm sure we all know about all the issues there, from the kidnap of Chibok girls to Dapchi girls and so many other issues that girls face. We have the highest number of out-of-school girls, child brides, and you name it. So I think then I was in my 3rd year in university undergrad, and I was just like, I always said I was privileged, and I acknowledged that, but like one of the speakers said, it shouldn't be a privilege to go to school. I mean, it's a basic right. So I think that frustration just made me just start. So talking about the benefits of education and skills, I mean, they're countless. It gives you a fighting chance in life. It gives you opportunities. It gives you a voice, I would say, and being here, and I remember Yasmine talking about scholarships, which I'm on one. So it's just like when girls or women have opportunities, I mean, we're limitless, and it gives us opportunities, to speak up, and advocate for other young girls and women to have the same opportunities. So I would say that education is the center of everything. I mean, it's SDG4. I don't know how they named it, which one is first or second, but I think SDG4 and 5 should have been equally, the first and the most important SDGs, because, the world will not transform into that sustainable world if gender equality is not achieved, to be honest, and if people are not educated. We have less than 10 years to Agenda 2030, and I would say we still have a very long way to go. I mean, many girls are still out of school, and even the ones that are in school, I mean, you barely see wash facilities available for them. There are issues around safety and security. Back home, every day I have to call my family. I used to, because of, the high level of violent extremism, that is going on. So it's just, really tough. So I would say education is very important. Like I said, it gives you an equal playing ground. It gives you opportunities to dream. And we all know that you will not be able to make meaningful contributions on the global scale and even at the local level if you're not educated to a large extent. So I would say that some of the things that that need to be done is partnerships, and I would say partnerships with other, sectors. For example, we talk about encouraging girls, to go into STEM, which I truly, advocate for. But I'm just thinking that if, for example, after spending a long time in school and then you graduate and you don't even have a decent job, because we know that there's high level of inequality in pay in many sectors, particularly in STEM. So if at the end of the day, return on investment in education takes a long time to achieve. So if we don't partner with, maybe Ministry of Works, job creation, and all of that to ensure that, women are given good opportunities and good pays, I mean, we will not really achieve what we want. So also, I would say sensitization is key. I would say how, we know how people are. For example, if I say I'm an engineer or I'm a carpenter, how many people would allow me to go into their homes, So there needs to be a mindset shift while we're educating girls and encouraging them to go into, the STEM fields and all of that. We need to ensure that people are open-minded to be receptive to these women, because I know back home, there's a lot of stereotypes and biases. So even when girls, proudly say they are engineers, they're doctors and all of that, there's still this bias that the society gives to them. So I would say that partnerships with other, stakeholders are important. Natasha made mention of, I think everyone really mentioned that, but I'll talk about the concept of nothing about us without us. Over the years, I've gone for so many programs, interventions, and meetings where you'd see them talking about future for girls and women, and you barely see women and girls, attending those programs. Or even when they attend, it's based on tokenism or just ticking the boxes saying, okay, let's just have 3 seats for girls and women. But I would say that for us to really achieve our goals, we need to ensure that girls and women are meaningfully and actively participating in such interventions, from the design of the project to implementation to monitoring and evaluation. I would say that because we know where it hurts. And the last thing I will talk about is, context-based interventions. When people say Africa, they just talk about Africa like it's one country or one, town. But Africa is made up of, I think, 54, 55 countries. So context is important. The issues affecting girls in Nigeria are different from Togo, Sierra Leone, and other countries. So when you're drawing up programs and plans, you should ensure that you meet the needs, the specific and contextual needs of the girls in those particular regions. For me, it could be child marriage in my region. For some other people, it could be insecurity. So you cannot come up with solutions that cover the entire Africa without acknowledging that, there are many intersecting factors, and context, is super important. Lastly, about so many interventions that are going on, there are many, Malala Fund, we'll talk about GPE and all of that, but I would like to be biased by talking about the GCI. It's one intervention, not because I'm a part of it, but because I've seen how they've actually made the difference involving young feminists on board. Last week, we're at the Alliance board meeting in Dakar, and we saw how in the stakeholder engagement, it was very broad. We had the funders, the donors, we had the technical partners, we had people from different ministries, but most importantly, we had young feminists like myself talking about the issues that affect us. And then we've been able to see how and track progress. So I would say that there are many interventions, but the Gender at the Center initiative is one that I'll make reference to, because it's not only trying to prefer solutions, but is involving the young people that are affected by these issues on board. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wadi. We all heard from her. We need to include young people, young women in the planning, in the implementation of all of these things, and not just to tick boxes or to say that, we've included 1 or 2 people. We need as many as possible, because it requires, we require on the African continent at least a lot of different solutions, innovative solutions, and understanding that, Africa is not a country. In fact, it's a huge continent with diverse issues. Okay, so we can open up for questions. or comments from those in the audience. If you would like to ask a question, you can write it in the chat. If you feel comfortable with this program being recorded and you don't mind being shown, you can also open your mic and video and ask a question. We haven't received any questions, or at least I don't see any. Okay, if we don't have any questions, let me give the opportunity maybe for the panelists, if you want to talk, say something about what your other panelist has said, or if you have any questions, comments, you can feel free to do so.
I have a question. I mean, first of all, yeah, Caroline, Wadi, Yasmine, it was really incredible hearing your innovations and in the context that you gave, and something that I was hearing throughout and that us at UNGEI really talk about and are launching some multi-country sector programming around is addressing and ending gender stereotypes within the classroom. And Wadi, you mentioned that, Caroline, Yasmine. And so I guess, what do you think it will take to be able to, see a world where the first woman of something is not the last, right? How do we address those gender stereotypes? I would love to hear your thoughts or examples that you have of programs.
Well, I can start maybe, since it's a point that I stress about not being the last, right? But it's very interesting because, and this is something that also Wadi pointed out very well, which is the fact that we need to have an inclusive leadership, at the policymaking level, having inclusive approaches. And when it comes to, let's take the example of women in spheres of power. I work in business and I used to work with institutions, and I still do sometimes. Everywhere you go in these spheres, which is spheres of power, you only see men. Like most of the time, I'm speaking to quite old men, and privileged men. So the fact is, the reality, wherever you are in the world, it is already tough to be a woman in these spheres. So imagine being a woman either from an underprivileged background or from the continent, where, as you say, there is still bias and stigma around education and going forward in positions of power, right? And this is something global. You can find it in every continent of the world, in different levels and layers. But the thing is, if we focus on this, one way, for example, in politics or even in the private sector, to improve or to achieve a certain equality has been quota. This comes with my first point at the beginning when I spoke about quota. If it doesn't come naturally, because people don't even think, right, of including more women, they don't, it doesn't cross their mind that there should be a representation, then we should have it as an enforced target or point, so that, for example, in a very high-rated school or university, the top universities in the world, if you don't see enough African women, yes, there should be a quota. The same thing should happen in every sphere of privilege and power, because it doesn't mean because you are a minority or like a person from a diverse background that you shouldn't have that seat. And so I would say that it should start by that. The fact that, there is a problem, not everybody is willing to address it. So let's enforce it at the policy level to make it sure that, there is the first, but it should not be the last. And especially, as Wadi said, there should not be any token. We're not coming there just to tick that box, right? We need to make sure that it is a meaningful engagement that young women have. And I finish here.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Maybe I'll just jump in here, because there's fire in my belly just listening to this conversation and getting really excited about it. And I'd like to actually just pick up an example of Malawi. The reason why I'm picking Malawi right now is because as we are speaking right now, there's an ongoing intergenerational dialogue happening right now. It started yesterday, going on today until tomorrow, speaking to the exact same issues we are talking about: women in leadership, in business, in private sector, and adolescent girls and young women, for them to pass on the lessons, to tell them of the pitfalls, to show them we went through this, you can avoid this by that, so that the women currently in leadership now are not going to be the last in Malawi. They've actually congregated almost 500 young women, girls from all over Malawi to come and listen, talk, and see the role models in power, in leaders, in powerful places, and for the adolescent girls themselves to be able to speak to these leaders, to tell them, this is what it is like, this is what we need, this is what will transform our lives. And I think the reason why I'm also picking Malawi is, as I step back, it has some really drastic statistics from an adolescent girls, young women perspective with respect to the HIV pandemic, because we do know that, like in Malawi currently, only 27% of girls actually enroll into secondary school. And of those 27%, only 13%, half, will attend, and less than 5% will graduate. So literally they will be left in limbo. There are structural barriers preventing them from going forward. And from discussions with them, they do say that we have, number one, no role models. Number two, we need to get policies and frameworks enforced. We need support from the whole spectrum of sectors that has been mentioned just now. It's not only education that has been mentioned fantastically, because the health system has to come in, finance has to come in, social development, business, entrepreneurship. So making it a movement of all the sectors coming together to bring the step change. So really, like you've rightfully said, there's need for all the sectors, there's need for intergenerational leadership, and also for the quotas to make sure there's representation, so that there's the leadership there, there's the adolescent girls here at the center, and then there are those who will come following these adolescent girls we have, so that it's a pipeline from those who are there, these ones coming, and those who will come also over. Thank you very much.
So I would like to talk about, I'm really enjoying the conversations as well. And then I was just thinking of how I remember last time we're talking about stereotypes. And sorry, is someone talking? Okay, so we're talking about stereotypes, and I was just thinking of different institutions and, the different bodies that play a role in this society, because, every time we talk about things, we're like this society. So I was thinking of what makes this society, it's families, right? And so I think that the family is such a strong, it's the smallest, I always say it, yet the most powerful institution in the society, because we all belong to a family. And when you see the maybe power dynamics, the cultural and traditional mindsets, and all those things that are sacred and meant to be protected, it starts from the home. So many of these biases and stereotypes, I would say, even though of course we talk about religious institutions, political institutions, financial, economic, and all of that, the family is very important, because we all grew up from a family, and we all grew up with some mindsets that were passed on to us. So I think that, I wouldn't say overhaul, but that shift can start happening from those places, because many of these mindsets, we have these belief systems that we hold on to so much, were passed on to us from someone. And until we start to, have those conversations at home, changing the dynamics about who does this, gender roles, and all of that, it will be replicated in the society. So I feel that as much as we're having those conversations at those high levels, the family is one place that we should be having those conversations. For example, you see families where maybe a typical or a traditional African home where there's a boy and a girl, who does what, who is asked to do what. As simple as saying, oh, the girl should always cook or clean, and the boy is allowed to go and play, and all of that. Or telling the girl how she should dress, how she should be prim and proper, but excusing some of the things that the boys do, when they grow up, you see them replicated. From boys will be boys, it will translate to men will be men. So all those things that we hold on to or we excuse at that lower level called family, I think is part of the reasons why these things are replicated in the society. Who are these policymakers? They have homes, they have families. And maybe they grew up believing that it will, okay, even in school, where you tell the girl she cannot be the class captain, she has to be the assistant. And you see that even in the school is the man that is the principal, the woman is maybe the secretary or something else. When you see all these dynamics and power plays, they are the reasons why things are replicated. So I think that all these shifts and all these conversations should be had at the top level, but also at the lower level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have some questions in the chat. Let me go ahead and read it out. Yeah, the participant says, yeah, first they apologize for coming in a bit late. So maybe the questions might have already been addressed, but the questions are as follows. Is it possible for organizations based outside of the African continent to help African women and girls achieve an education without dominating the space or becoming a white savior? I know they may have influence due to their social financial power, but considering history, white Western institutions do not have a great reputation. How do we ensure the needs and wants of African women are prioritized? Any of you can?
Well, I could give I could give the example of the African Union European Union program, which, I mean, for many reasons we could be critical on the history of Europe and Africa and the history of these institutions, and we should. I'm the first one doing it and putting them in check when it's needed. But then I joined that program, and the reason was it was a program where 42 young people from both continents and the diaspora were invited to provide expertise and to work with the institution with an allocated budget of 10 million euros. So it was a project where equally both parties had a say, and this is very important. It shouldn't be a top-down approach. And of course, then, I mean, the money, we know where it came from Europe for the majority, or maybe from all of it. But at least the approach to co-create, first of all, had young people for the first time part of the drafting of the programs, the selecting of the partners, and then the monitoring and evaluation. So meaningful, again, as we say before, meaningful engagement and not just tokenism of, you know, having young people there to tick the box. So this is what was a very important point. And then how do we replicate something like this within international organizations? Because again, important problem is that often, because these entities have big budgets and big ideas, they would come to the continent and try to implement something that is not even matching with the reality on the ground. So having knowledge on the ground and people from local organizations supporting them is super important. And by the way, this was one of the requirements we wrote in our draft proposals, that local young youth-led organizations would be involved somehow in the implementing process. So, and this we could do it because, you know, we brought that expertise, being, you know, young and being from different backgrounds. But when a person who doesn't actually even think about these drafts, those projects, and then implements them, of course, some people are left behind. So I would say local ownership and partnering with local people and local entities, super important. And I'll finish here.
Excellent. Maybe if I jump in again to continue with what Yasmine has said very eloquently, the partnership with the local organizations, the grassroots movements, the youth movements. And I think just to give an example of the Education Plus initiative, how it's being rolled out, the premise is universal. gender equality, women's empowerment for adolescent girls through secondary education. But how it is being framed in the country is specific to the country context. So the country is having multi-stakeholder consultations, not only in the capital, but also in the regions, in the rural villages, right at the grassroots level, to hear from the young women there, to hear from the women's movement, to hear from the youth movement about what they want this to look like. So they actually co-create the initiative. They say, this is our problem here, this is what it needs to look like, and so this is how we are going to shift the power, the influence, and the resources, because those are the three shifts they're saying they need to have: power, influence, resources, giving it to the ground for them to create what will be applicable to them. So I think that is one of the ways to make sure that truly, yes, it is homegrown. It is not an imposed agenda to say it has to look like this. It comes from the bottom up, saying these are our issues, this is how we want them addressed, and this is how you can support us. Over.
Natasha or Wadi, did you want to take the go at the question, or?
No, I think they've answered it very perfectly. And it's something that I always, have people ask, this is the white supremacy, white savior thing and all of that. And they've answered it. Another angle I would say I would just come from is also the people at the receiving end. Sometimes, I don't know how it works in many other African countries, but I would say back home, everything that is foreign is looked at as more important or more quality than local. So even when you go to school, whatever you're doing, or even products, when you say this is imported, everyone trusts it better than things that are locally made. And I think that mindset can also be seen in the development space, when sometimes when they're local experts that maybe come to a community, they would not be given as much attention as international experts. So I think it's for both parties, or both parties to come to a common, a central point where, yes, we try to coin and, contextualize interventions, which I like what Caroline said, when, there could be a program, but women empowerment in maybe Somalia could be different from in Chad, because, their problems are different, their cultures are different, and the urgencies for that situation is different. But also, I would say that a mindset shift from the beneficiaries and recipients as well, to say that I'm from this place, and even though I am a local person, who is indigenous, it doesn't mean that I don't know what I'm doing, because I would say I face that as well, going for programs. And because I'm from here, people don't want to maybe give me as much attention or honor like somebody else. So I would say that we should call out the organizations as well. And it's something that is going on. And I know that a lot of conversations are being held now and telling them that, your reality is different from ours. Global North, Global South are very different, so you should take it and pay attention by partnering and collaborating with CSOs and stakeholders on the ground. But I'll say, we Africans as well, we should learn to be receptive to our own thing and own our own realities, and appreciate ourselves as well. So that's what I want to just add, that it could come from here, but we are so it's bottom, top, and top, bottom approach, I would say. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was summed up quite well. And, as global organizations, especially from the global north, we need to be willing, right, to challenge our unconscious or conscious bias. And we need to be willing to be able to shift over the power and to dismantle our own patriarchal systems and colonial systems that are so embedded in our organizations. And then once we're able to do that, then it's all about those partnerships. It's all about handing over that power. It's all about handing over those resources. And if we're able to get to a world like that, I really, truly believe that we would be able to have huge advancements within, girls' education. Yeah.
Yes, participants, yes, saying thank you very much for your answers, truly appreciate it. We don't have any more questions in the chat, so I think we can start wrapping up this conversation, this very enriching conversation. As we are leaving the space, we take this opportunity to reflect on a set of ideas and recommendations clustered by this amazing panel. We talked about the need to ensure the removal of barriers to young women and girls' education, especially access to sexual and reproductive health rights services and facilities, access to protection. We need to ensure that schools, colleges, and universities are safe spaces for young women and girls. We need to ensure that quotas and equal access to education is made available to immigrant women and girls. We need to ensure that educational curricula is diverse, inclusive, and youth-friendly. We need to implement gender transformative education programs through holistic and multi-sectoral approaches. We need to provide education and skills development opportunities and programs in alignment with the needs of young people. We need to transform legislation and policies that affect education to be inclusive and comprehensive to the needs of young women and girls. We need to promote innovative approaches, including informal education and alternative formats, including, the arts, poetry, and storytelling. And we also need to make sure that we have an inclusive leadership, with opportunities for intergenerational dialogue. We need to partner with local communities, especially to avoid, instances of white saviorism or, just misconceptions on what the needs of communities are. Any partnering organization needs to partner with local communities at the grassroots level, including with youth movements, and not just in urban areas, but also in rural ones. I think we summed it up. All right, this conversation has been very enriching. I hope we didn't miss anything out with that. But let me thank you, dear participants, Yasmine, Caroline, Natasha, and Wadi, for joining us today on this conversation on innovation for inclusive, equitable, and quality education for women and girls in Africa. We would also like to thank the Skoll Foundation and Skoll World Forum for this opportunity to host our event at the Ecosystem Day of the 2022 edition of the Forum. Thank you again for your time and expertise. As the NalaFeminist Collective, we will cluster this conversation into a briefing paper on the role of innovation for inclusive, equitable, and quality education for young women and girls in Africa. And we'll highlight case studies and present it as a set of recommendations and best practices that we'll be happy to share with you soon. Thank you again. Keep doing what you're doing. You're all very inspiring. Wish you a happy evening and a happy weekend.
Thank you very much for